Between the hills, the stars, the sky, the river so clear, river so clear.
Let us join in spirit, meditation, reflection, or prayer as we deepen our service and share the opening words from Ken Patton. This house is for the ingathering of nature and human nature. It is a house of friendships, a haven in trouble, an open room for the encouragement of our struggle. It is a house of freedom, guarding the dignity and worth of every person. It offers a platform for the free voice, for declaring both in times of security and danger, the full and undivided conflict of opinion. It is a house of truth-seeking, where scientists can encourage devotion to their quest, where mystics can abide in the community of searchers. It is a house of art, adorning its celebrations with melodies and handiworks. It is a house of prophecy, outrunning times past and times present, in visions of growth and progress. This house is a cradle for our dreams, the workshop of our common endeavor. We join Unitarian Universalists all over the world in lighting our chalice. And Marnie, would you come forward, please, and light our chalice? The chalice is a symbol of the spark of life in each of us. And if you have your chalice with you at home on Zoom and wish to turn on your video and light your chalice with us, you're welcome to do so. We are in good company. Our chalice lighting words are from Elizabeth McMaster. We light our flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just. In the search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. We are very fortunate today to have with us Mr. Clay Jenkinson as our speaker. Mr. Jenkinson is well-known American Humanities scholar, author, and educator. He has co-hosted the Thomas Jefferson Hour on public radio for many years, and recently this spring started a new radio program, Listening to America with Clay Jenkinson. He has appeared in 5 Ken Burns documentary films, most recently, The American Buffalo. Please welcome Mr. Jenkinson.
I want to read, first of all, I want to congratulate you for what you do. You represent something that's extremely valuable in every community. I'm sure you know that, but I just want to say that, how much I prize what you do. I wish I were here more often. I travel too much. But I'm a Unitarian at heart, of course. My man Jefferson was a Unitarian. He said the Trinity was too complex for a 5-year-old to understand, and therefore not worth knowing. That Jefferson believed that Jesus was the greatest man who ever lived, certainly the greatest ethicist, but he had serious doubts about whether he was the Christ. And I find myself in the same position. And so thank you for what you do, and thank you for inviting me to come here from time to time. I really enjoy a chance to converse in a really honest way with you. And so here's my concern. I'm in my late 60s now. This is a tough week for me because it's the 19th, isn't it? So just 3 days from now will be the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy. How many of you were alive and remember where you were? Everyone who was alive then remembers where they were. Can you believe it? It's 60 years. And there's this new book by Paul Landis, one of the Secret Service agents, who says that he tampered with the evidence and put the magic bullet in his pocket and later put it on the gurney. If this is true, this overturns the table of the Warren Commission and everything else. So this is going to be a hard November 22nd for me. And of course, the slaughter of the innocents that's going on in Gaza and Israel. It's true that 12,000 Palestinians have now been killed. You just have to do the math. How many of them are warriors? or terrorists. And of course, the slaughter of the innocents on the Israeli side too. And I just feel that if the UN really were what it was supposed to be, international troops would get between them right now and stop this. Because I can't possibly imagine how this doesn't make things worse, right? How could this not make things worse? And so I understand there are arguments on every side, but it seems to me that the world community has a duty in times like this to get between the combatants and say, there has to be another path. This cannot be the path. All right, anyway, so I never thought when I reached this age that the United States would have come to this. Remember when Joe Wilson of South Carolina in 2009 shouted at President Obama, "You lie," during his State of the Union message, and we were all shocked by the incivility of that. Well, that was the golden age compared to now. Have you been following the news? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert exchanging crude language on the floor of the House of Representatives. Kevin McCarthy apparently elbowing his enemies as he goes past them in the hall. A senator from Oklahoma offering to get into a fist fight with a labor leader. I actually would have liked to see that. Outside, of course, but I think that if you're the head of the Teamsters, you win that fight, you know. How did it come to this? How did it come to this? In some sense, and I think about this every day of my life because, of course, my connection with Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers, we may be circling the drain here. And if we aren't, then the question is, how do we turn this around? How do we come back? You know, we don't have the great leaders who can do this for us. John F. Kennedy or Robert Kennedy. Our two giants from the United States Senate, Ken Conrad and Darrell Dorgan. We don't have leaders like that now. And so the leadership is not going to lift us. We no longer have those great public theologians that we had in the mid-20th century, Reinhold Niebuhr and Martin Marty and others, who had huge public presence. And when Reinhold Niebuhr would make a pronouncement or write an essay, it would be in the cover of Time magazine. The mainline churches have been no-shows, I think, in the crisis of our times. So if we don't have presidential leadership or leadership at the highest levels of the American government, or if they exist, they're silent. And if we don't have the churches playing the role that they played to restrain human passion and to urge people to rise to a higher level of civilization during the 20th century, now we're in this period of retreat, then how is this supposed to turn around? So I've handed you this handout. Look at the first page. I wrote out 11 suggestions. And you know, when I wrote these, and I've talked a little bit about them in the last week, they seem pitiful to me because they're so small and they put so much pressure on you. But without you, this isn't going to happen. The recovery is going to come from us up. And so we have to, and you Unitarians are already doing most of this, so I'm talking to the converted here, to the enlightened ones, but here they are. Number one, wean yourself of 24/7, 365 cable television. Really, we have to do that if we want to cheer up. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when there were only 2 television stations in Western North Dakota, NBC and CBS, and then ABC came in, and then cable with 13 channels, and now you know what we have. I honestly think if we all cut the cord off our television sets, we'd be a happier people and a more community-based people. Of course, that would be the death of capitalism, but still, and maybe that's okay. So I think that cable media is toxic on both sides, and I'm not suggesting moral equivalency, please, but I think it's toxic on both sides. Number 2, avoid echo chambers. So, you know, the people who watch Fox only, and when I go into a dentist office or a doctor's office or any place in Bismarck, North Dakota, it's Fox, the airport Fox. They sometimes in the dentist chair say, do you want me to change the channel? And I say, just turn it off, please. But That's one echo chamber. North Dakotans like that one better than the other one. And MSNBC is another. And again, I'm not suggesting moral equivalency, but they are self-stroking, and they have deliberate blinders on ideas outside their own. And there's a great deal of righteousness on both sides, including on the side of MSNBC. And righteousness is not going to get us very far, I don't think. Number 3, don't initiate the aggression. Aggression may come to you, but we should strive never to initiate it. Number 4, don't take the bait. And, someone like Donald Trump is a master at getting you to take the bait. He'll say some totally outrageous thing, like he's going to deport 12 million documented workers. And then the people that find that repulsive, which I hope would be every rational human being, they take the bait and fight back, but this just fuels it, I think. Number 5, avoid incendiary language and terms. If you use the word redneck, you're probably not going to make friends in the co-op at Harvey. You have to deliberately discipline yourself to use terms that aren't offensive, and it's hard to do. Take the abortion debate. If you say we're pro-life, that suggests that the others aren't. Of course, it's not true. And so it's very hard to discipline ourselves to avoid incendiary terms, and we don't always know what they are, of course. Number 6, avoid the usual talking points. And this used to really be the case in the era of Rush Limbaugh. I travel the Great Plains all the time, and you go into a Cenex co-op in Harvey or Velva or Buffalo, South Dakota, and you hear the talking points from yesterday's show. And today you hear them from Sean and from Tucker and from so on. The people just store up their talking points, they hear them, and the next day they play them out without investigating them or really asking, I wonder if that's really true. So next time you get into an argument, I mean argument in the nice sense, try to discipline and say, oh, I'm just doing a talking point here. I'm just saying what I heard Rachel say, or I'm just saying what I heard Anderson Cooper say. Try to avoid that and find a new way to say what it is you want to say. Number 7, grant others legitimacy and agency. This is so interesting to me because I'm a North Dakotan and I love North Dakota with all of my heart. And there are 760,000 of us, and I would say that, well, we know that Donald Trump got the 3rd largest vote in North Dakota in 2016. So West Virginia, Oklahoma, North Dakota. I just traveled the state last week. I wrote about it on ltamerica.org. You can go there if you like, but I only saw 4 Trump posters in 450 miles. I think the same percentage of North Dakotans are going to vote for him, but I think that some of the magic has worn off a little bit. So who knows? But lowering the temperature, I'm not suggesting how one should vote, but just lowering the temperature of our national political discourse. Number 8, doubt your own certitudes. If you have a point of view on, let's say, Gaza, that you feel strongly about, ask yourself, what's the best argument on the other side? Or how do I know what I know? Or how am I so sure about what I'm so sure about? And if I had to make the case for the other point of view, how would I make it? And if you do that, it's an imaginative projection of legitimacy to the other point of view. And in the case of, say, Gaza and Israel right now, there has to be another point of view, because neither point of view is adequate to this story. And so this is one that really invites us to say, well, what would if let's say I'm 100% pro-Israel, what's the argument for the Palestinian people? Why did this happen? What does it signify? What's the rage that this is an expression of? And if I'm pro-Palestinian, then I should say, all right, what would we have wanted Israel to do here? So in each case, it's in our interest to try to imaginatively place ourselves in the other camp, if there are 2 camps. Listen with respect and generosity. Listening is hard. In most arguments that I see, people listen, they don't really listen, they just wait for the other person to stop, so they can then say what they were going to say, and then they wait for the other person to stop. And of course, that's no way to do it. You have to be able to listen by saying, what I think I hear you saying is, In other words, if you really are listening, you can talk it back to the person and say, if I'm misrepresenting your position, please let me know. But I think I hear you saying. Really hard to do, and you can do it in your head even if you're not doing out loud. Number 10, take a lesson from Mr. Jefferson, artificial good humor. I'll come back to that in just a moment. And then from Jefferson's first inaugural address, he said in a famous passage that I'll read, we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists, meaning we're all progressives and we're all conservatives, we're all Republicans, we're all Democrats, etc. All right, so when I wrote these out after years of reflection on this question, and they seem so weak to me, because I'm sure most of you are already doing these things. That's why you're Unitarians. Is this going to be enough? If you and I each in our own little way ripple out a better citizenship model, how does it influence a larger community? In a nation of 340 million people, the idea that you and I can turn things around seems pathetic. But what else do we have here? We don't have John F. Kennedy's first inaugural address here. It's a different age, and so it's not going to come from our leadership. It's going to have to come from us. And so let me go through this artificial good humor passage because it's so great from Jefferson. I know Jefferson is deeply complicit in race and slavery, but there's so much more to Jefferson than that. This is a letter that he wrote to his favorite grandson. It's on your page 1. When his grandson was going up to Boston into the heart of enemy territory, Federalist territory, and Jefferson knew that his grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, because he was his grandson, would be subject to a lot of abuse up in the Federalist enclaves. So he wrote this immense letter, which you can read anytime on the internet, but here's what he said. This is so important for us, and I'm going to challenge you between here and January 1st on this very question. In the middle of the letter, he says, I have mentioned good humor as one of the preservatives of our peace and tranquility. It is among the most effectual, and its effect is so well imitated and aided artificially by politeness that this also becomes an acquisition of the first-rate value and truth. In other words, it's great to be born good-humored. Most of us aren't. If you're born good-humored, excellent. But if you're not, then what? Here's what he suggests. In truth, politeness is artificial good humor. It covers the natural want of it and ends by rendering habitual a substitute nearly equivalent to the real virtue. So if you're not naturally good-humored, you can become good-humored through habit of always responding gracefully, of always speaking positively, of avoiding aggression and ad hominem and so on. So here's my challenge to you. I'll read the rest of the letter because it just gets better. But in the between now and January 1st, when someone cuts you off in traffic or someone reaches for something in the grocery store or the cart's in your way, which drives me nuts, I just want to say I have ideal grocery store etiquette. I do. I don't do many things really well, but I have ideal grocery store etiquette. And here's the problem. I will park my cart in a place where it's not going to get in anyone's way, and then go to find the cheese or the fish. But I'm so old now that I lose my cart. Does this happen to you? You park your cart, and then like 30 minutes later, you're like, what? Did someone steal my cart? And then you have to get it to the car. But for the next, between now and January 1st, every time there's a provocation, and you know there will be some, maybe at Thanksgiving dinner, respond with exquisite artificial good humor and just watch what happens. It works. I was a newspaper columnist for 10 years for the Bismarck Tribune, and I got a fair amount of hate mail, and some of it vicious hate mail, making you wonder, how can there be that much hate over words? But I invariably wrote back a polite response. I would say, you said that I should never have been born and you wish I would die in a fiery car accident. And then you talked about trade policy, and then I will engage a little bit about trade policy. And then at the end of the letter, I will say, it would have been so much easier to take you seriously if you hadn't been so mean. I don't know what you thought you were going to achieve by that kind of aggression, but I have ignored it, and I'm responding to the substance of your letter. Almost invariably, you get a second letter saying, I apologize, I was a hothead, I shouldn't have done that, I was just mad. So people are willing to be talked off the ledge. So how many of you will take this challenge for the next 6 weeks to only offer artificial good humor when you're provoked? Look at most of you are, no way, I'm not doing that. Are you kidding? So let me just finish this letter. It's great to be born with good humor. If not, you can inculcate it by habit. It is the practice of sacrificing to those whom we meet in society all the little conveniences and preferences which will gratify them and deprive us of nothing worth a moment's consideration. It is the giving a pleasing and flattering turn to our expressions which still conciliate others, make them pleased with us as well as themselves. How cheap a price for the goodwill of another. When this is in return for a rude thing, okay, let's say someone says something awful to you. Jefferson's on this. When this is in return for a rude thing said by another, your good humor brings them to their senses. It mortifies them and corrects them in the most salutary way and places them at the feet of your good nature in the eyes of the company. So by responding in this way, you're not only doing the right thing, but you're shaming them in a really low aggression way and exemplifying how it should work. And the people around you are going to notice that and say, wow, he handled or she handled that well. Correction in the most salutary ways places them at the feet of your good nature. But in stating prudential rules for our government and society, I must not omit the important one of never entering into dispute or argument with another. Never entering into dispute or argument with another. I never yet saw an instance of two disputants convincing the other by argument. It gets a little exaggerated here. I've seen many of them getting warm, becoming rude, and shooting one another. Conviction is the effect of our own dispassionate reasoning and so on. Then he goes on a little later to speak of Dr. Franklin as the greatest example of all this. Dr. Franklin, it was one of these rules which above all others made Dr. Franklin the most amiable of men in society, never to contradict anybody. If he was urged to announce an opinion, he did it rather by asking questions, as if for information, or by suggesting doubts. In other words, he used the Socratic style. When I hear another express, and this is Jefferson now again, when I hear another express an opinion which is not mine, I say to myself, he has a right to his opinion, as I to mine. Why should I question it? His error does me no injury. I love that. Jefferson was pretty sure of himself. His error does me no injury. So that's my challenge. I think that's how we're going to turn this country around, in these slow, personal, communitarian, and generous ways. It is not going to be easy, but it doesn't just take Jefferson. I made a list of 4 passages from the New Testament that you would think a United States senator about to have a fist fight on the floor of the Senate would keep in mind, especially since so many of them loudly proclaim their Christianity. But here's one, John 8:7. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Matthew 7:5. Hypocrite, first cast out the beam from thy own eyes, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote of thy neighbor's eye. Matthew 7:1. Judge not, lest ye be judged. For with what judgment you give, you too shall be judged. And then Matthew 7:12 and Luke 6:31. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jefferson thought that if you just lived according to this code, the world would be an infinitely better place. This alone, Jesus, the man, you don't need him to be the Christ to have formulated some of the greatest ethical principles in history. I drove here today. I live up near Horizon Middle School. I drove past Century Baptist. There were 400 cars there. 400 cars. That's the gospel of wealth and the gospel of success. I personally don't think that's the gospel of Jesus, but it works in our time. And so I think that these simple principles that Jefferson understood can help us. So now let's turn to the second letter to John Adams. they were frenemies from 1800 until 1812 because they sort of crossed swords and were of opposite emerging parties, and they really disagreed about human nature, and they disagreed about the French Revolution. Jefferson was a Unitarian on human nature. He believed that man is good, that humans are good, born good, and capable of indefinite perfectibility. Adams' view was, if you looked around, there's no perfectibility in humankind. So Jefferson was the optimist in this, and they got into this, but they'd quarreled, and it looked like they were never going to communicate again. But then on the first day of January 1812, John Adams wrote a letter to Jefferson, sort of really timidly offering a chance to renew their friendship. And Jefferson wrote back a stiff little reply, very cautious. Both of them are very cautious here. Adams wrote a more effusive letter. Jefferson responded, and suddenly the gates of their ancient love and friendship opened, and they exchanged 147 letters in the last 12 years of their life, and they're considered some of the greatest letters in American history. So there's an example of reconciliation that I find beautiful, and here's how they did it. Adams was the more honest of the two. He was always sort of wanting to have a little punching fight with Jefferson, wanted to get a few things off of his chest. Jefferson was a harmony lover. One of his, he wrote his own 10 Commandments, and one was take things always by their smooth handle. Jefferson did not want to get into a fight with Adams. And so Adams would try to provoke something, and Jefferson would say as little about it as possible, but in a very conciliatory way, and then change the subject. And that allowed the friendship on both sides to continue. But in 1813, a year after all this began, they got into the question of aristocracy. And Adams' point of view was there will always be aristocrats in every society. There will always be the wealthiest, the smartest, the poets, the most beautiful woman, the most handsome man, the greatest athlete, etc. That in every society there will be aristocrats, and that it's often hereditary, and we should just accept that as part of the world. For Jefferson, no. Jefferson believed in meritocracy, that a genius can as often be born in an earth lodge as in a home in Philadelphia. Jefferson truly, aside from slavery, of course, Jefferson truly believed in meritocracy, and so they get into this dispute about this. Jefferson says, this is in the middle of another really long and interesting letter, "For I agree with you that there is a natural aristocracy among men." So he's conceding as much as he can to Adams. Adams says aristocracy is a fact of life. Jefferson's going to do a little twist on it, but he starts by saying, I agree with you that there is an aristocracy. The grounds of this are virtue and talents. Formerly, bodily powers gave place among the aristoi, but since the invention of gunpowder has armed the weak as well as the strong with missile death, bodily strength like beauty, good humor, politeness, and other accomplishments has become but an auxiliary ground of distinction. Now he changes the subject. There's also an artificial aristocracy founded on wealth and birth without either virtue or talents. With these, it would belong to the first class. The natural aristocracy, that is the meritocracy. Your children and grandchildren going off to college and then doing amazing things in the world. The natural aristocracy I consider as the most precious gift of nature for the instruction, the trust, and the government of society. And indeed, it would have been inconsistent in creation to have formed man for the social state, and not have provided virtue and wisdom enough to manage the concerns of the society. May we not even say that the form of government is best, which provides the most effectually for a pure selection of these natural aristoi into offices of government. The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provisions should be made to prevent its ascendancy. Okay, so this is the dispute. Interesting. I love it that Jefferson is a small d Democrat, and that he truly believes in a nation of meritocracy, and that's essentially what we all wish we were. But then he says this, he knows that Adams disagrees. On the question, what is the best provision, you and I differ. But we differ as rational friends, using the free exercise of our own reason and mutually indulging its errors. Then the next paragraph. I have thus stated my opinion on a point on which we differ, and they differed profoundly on this point. Not with a view to controversy. We are both too old to change opinions which are the result of a long life of inquiry and reflection. But on the suggestion of a former letter of yours that we ought not to die before we have explained ourselves to each other. And then he, after going through some really contentious zones here, and then having said, you know, we differ as rational friends. It's okay that we differ. Each of us has earned the right over a long lifetime of reading and reflection to his point of view. Now he wants to really heal this friendship in a much more positive way. So he turns to this. You and I, we acted in perfect harmony through a long and perilous contest for our liberty and independence. A constitution has been acquired, which though neither of us think perfect, yet both consider as competent to render our fellow citizens the happiest and the securest on whom the sun has ever shone. If we do not think exactly alike as to its imperfections, it matters little to our country, which, after devoting to its long lives of disinterested labor, we have delivered over to our successors in life, who will be able to take care of it and of themselves. Isn't that beautiful? So here's this potentially, imagine this if it were a debate on Fox or MSNBC, these two. But no, Jefferson is lowering the temperature. He's embracing all that they share. He's invoking the revolution, which has like it's the magic thing that either one of them can invoke. And he's saying, if we disagree as rational friends in a democracy, that's okay. And if we would just live according to this, imagine what our national life would look like. And if we don't do it, it's not going to get done. I'll just give you a couple more sentences from Jefferson in his fabulous first inaugural address, March 4th, 1801. He said, "Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by separate names men of the same principle. We're all Federalists. We are all Republicans. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle." Simple enough, isn't it? So why can't this percolate up? Why have we come to this point where it seems like an existential struggle for the future of our republic? That both sides villainize the other and assume that if the other gets ascendancy, that the nation will collapse. If we were true Christians, we would work hard at this. If we were true small r Republicans, we would work hard at this. I mean, think of what a republic is. In a republic, Ted Cruz could never be reelected to the United States Senate. Not for his politics, but for going to Cancun during the hurricane. If you go to Cancun during the hurricane in your district, a small r republic, that's the end. People are going to vote you out the next time, of course. Why wouldn't they? Or if you remember during the pandemic in Georgia, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler were both doing insider trading as Congress planned to shut down the economy. So they had insider news before the announcements came, and they used it to get richer. And they both survived it. They both got thumped by the ethics committee, but nothing further. If this sort of thing happens in a small r republic, those people get voted out at the next election. But we've lost that. We've lost the basic code of civility, and the basic code of artificial politeness to each other. And in doing so, we're dragging the republic towards the drain, I believe. You know, my whole lifetime, I never thought that I would say the words that I'm now saying, that I think that we may not survive this. Let me say that again. I never thought. I lived through 1969, one of the worst years. We lived through 2001. I never thought that I might say, as someone who's, you know, pretty deeply knowledgeable about the founding and the history of the country, that we may not survive this. An old friend of mine from Oxford, Rick Stengel, published a New York Times article about the 8 books you should read about the death of democracy. So of course I ordered all of them immediately on Amazon, and I've got them now, and they all say the same thing, that you don't know it while it's happening. You don't know it till it's over. You don't know while it's happening because it's all this and that, and they don't seem to be part of the same whole. But they all say the same thing early on. When your elections are contested and the losing side refuses to yield, that's almost certainly the brink of the death of a republic. That there has to be a peaceful transfer of power. We saw it. Bush v. Gore in 2000. I don't know what you think was the actual result of that election, but let's say that it came out right when the Supreme Court unprecedentedly entered that fray. But the great thing about it was that Al Gore gave a magnificent, gracious concession speech afterwards. If you go look it up, it's one of the, you'll think, what era was that in? That's what a republic requires. And all these authors, and they've spent their lives working on this, these are not like partisan hotheads. They say when there's no peaceful transfer of power, you are at the brink of losing your republic. So, you know, when Barry Goldwater said a really wild set of things in 1964, he was thumped at the polls. It was one of the greatest political victories in American presidential history. I think LBJ won North Dakota, if you can imagine that. I believe he won North Dakota in 1964. The only way that we would be a republic is if this kind of crazy stuff that we're seeing got people thumped at the polls. In other words, if in the 2024 election, the non-crazy, the less crazy party won big and the crazier party was really rebuked at the polls, they would have to listen to that. But it's probably going to be 49-51 or 50.1, 49.8. And so it's on us, because if the American people are willing to send back into the presidency a man who said that he's going to deport 12 million people, then it's on us if we send him back. And I'm not trying to be partisan. This could be just as easily on the other side in another era, but in this case, it's one party that is claiming to not truly respect peaceful transfer of power, to call a riot for what it is, etc. And so it's on us. And I think it begins at home. It begins in this room. And so I'm hoping that you will I'm hoping that you will not only take my challenge seriously, the Jefferson Artificial Good Humor Challenge, but when it works, I hope that you'll contact me and say, it worked. Or if someone, flashes a gun at you in traffic, I'll want to hear that too. So anyway, that's my message today, is that A, I'm really frightened, as I've never been frightened before in my life. And B, it's not just about Democrats and Republicans, it's about the general collapse of civility and norms and respect. And 3, we don't have leaders that are talking about this. They're not big enough to talk about this in a way that's going to change things. There's no JFK in this story. There's no Ronald Reagan in this story. So if they're not going to do it, and there's no Reinhold Niebuhr, there's no cardinal who can do it, help us do it, then we're going to have to do it. And that means it's on us. And I don't know if we're up to it. But if you take my 10, if you go home and cut the cord off your television set, which, by the way, unplug it first, because that can go wrong in so many ways. But if you would even do, I'm sure many of you are doing most of these things already, but if you would do as many of them as you can muster between now and January 1st, I think you will say, you know what? That worked. I hope so, because I don't know any other answer. I don't believe that God's going to come in and save us. Do you? I'm a secularist to the point that I believe we're sort of on our own here. And so if we don't fix it, and we're America, if we don't fix it, it can't be fixed. So I'll take some questions or thoughts if you have any. Maybe I've just made you all gloomy.
I wanted to just echo that we do have some agency, even if it is just small things, conversations with people, maybe limited agency in how we can affect national elections, but we can definitely affect our local, even our school board, our library board. We had one of the worst North Dakota state legislative sessions ever this last year. So make sure that we're also keeping our eye on our local state government, avoiding another red wave there in this next election, because maybe we have more control there.
Yeah, thank you for that. And by the way, on joys and concerns, I didn't stand up because I'm not a regular, but I'm here to tell you, someone asked about my daughter. She's at Oxford. She is submitting her doctoral dissertation in 1 week. It's 100,000 words long, which is the limit. She sent it to me. I printed it. It broke my printer. I'm reading it, for typos. She's in love with a Swiss boy. I told her to marry him just to get the passport in case she needs it, But here's the thing I wanted to bring it up for. She loves the Great Plains the way I do. She loves North Dakota the way I do, that it's just like I was out, you can go to LT America and see this trip I took last Sunday driving back from Thompson, North Dakota, and it was just North Dakota at its very best. Just go and I wrote a long essay about it with some photographs. Seeing the rock piles. How many of you picked rocks in your life? And those rock piles didn't just get there. No one ever volunteered to go rock pile making. I mean, think of the labor that this represents. And they're everywhere. That's how we proved up North Dakota. And now the shelter belts are coming down all over the state because they've reached their natural life expectancy, and they're bulldozing them, as I suppose you have to, and then they're going to burn them, but they're not replanting because we think we're immune to another dust bowl. Are you nuts? It is so interesting I drove all the back roads. I didn't use the freeways. I just zigzagged, not even knowing where I was. And I went through innumerable small towns, population 180. It is so refreshing to do that. It is just so amazing. She loves it the way I love it. We love the Badlands. We love the Little Missouri River. We love North Dakota, but we don't love what's happening. And she says now, and of course she's only 29, but she said, "Dad, I'm not coming back. Why would I come back to a place that just had that legislative session?" She said, "All the things the people of my generation care about are being deliberately and violently thwarted by the legislature of North Dakota. Why would I come back to a place that's sending that signal to young people?" Now, of course, it's sending different signals to other young people. Don't get me wrong. But she's not coming back, and it breaks my heart. She's going to wind up in, someplace like Bozeman, Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just, I want her here because we can't fix the state unless the most extraordinary and idealistic people come and help us fix it. But the message we're giving is, if you're in the LGBTQ community, if you're concerned about your sexual orientation or identity, if you want to have some reasonable choice about your reproductive life, the message we're sending is not here. It's worse in other states, but we are right up there, folks. And so it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to think that North Dakota has become less attractive to some of the most interesting people in the state than it used to be. So, other thoughts or questions? Yes, Cole? Wait, the microphone's coming because there are millions worldwide watching us.
I don't mean for this to be a hot topic or whatever, but what are your thoughts on the recent re-release of the Bin Laden letter to America and then the following censorship of it?
This move towards, I'm doing a program in Vail. I do 4 programs in Vail, Colorado per year on very controversial issues. And the one that's coming will be on book banning. Well, book banning is, it's not the right term, banning. Banning's too strong a term, but there's certainly pressure on school boards, pressure on high school teachers, librarians, and principals, pressure on the public library system here in Bismarck. Angry people demanding that books they've never read should be removed from the stacks and so on. I'm not sorry that the Bin Laden letter was produced. I think enough time has passed that we can now read it better. At the time we couldn't read it very well because we were in deep hurt and rage. I think enough time has passed so we can read it better. And I think we should be reading it right now because I don't think we should censor it. I don't think we should even denounce it. I think we should read the Unabomber's manifesto too. I mean, we should read these things because they're an important part of American dissent and world dissent, and dissent is essential to the Enlightenment. But I think that now that what's going on in the Middle East is the greatest, it's a greater catastrophe in some ways even than Ukraine. And it could be the spark that blows the world up here. This could turn into a regional or wider war pretty quickly, I think, and might. I think there has to be a ceasefire, but I don't see it coming. And so I think we should be reading that because I'm going to do this, and this may sound like it's a little bit off subject. I don't think it is. Next year, I'm going to travel the whole country in an Airstream following Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie tour. I'm doing it because the 250th birthday of the country is coming. I'm dreading it, aren't you? The culture wars do 250. And so I'm going to go out. I want to go out and listen. I want to go hear the pulse of the country, to go places, to meet people, to talk to, go to Unitarian and other churches. I want to go to historically black churches. And I've never done that. I've never been in a church where they really sing. And by the way, you don't, But my congregational church doesn't even have a critical mass anymore. So I think it's important now that we do this. And one of the things I'm doing to get ready is I'm reading a book by a man named Geert Mak, who's Dutch, who followed Steinbeck around in 2010. But it wound up being like Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. It's a magnificent commentary on America. I don't always agree with it, but I get to see how a really smart Dutch person sees America. And he did the homework. He didn't just, get it off the BBC or CNN International. He came and examined America. And I've marked up the book because we need to listen to our critics. Some of them are nice critics and some of them are not. But I think it's okay this, 20 some years later to say bin Laden had a point, that America's presence in the Holy Land, especially in Saudi Arabia, was an open sore for fundamentalists there. And, there were some warning blasts before 2001. Nothing justifies what happened. But I think we have to see, how can we understand the reasoning behind some of these things? And in the current situation, Cole, we have to try to understand, and it's almost impossible. We have to try to understand why Hamas did it. Why did Hamas do this incredible slaughter? Not just because they're bad people, they may be, but there's something behind this that we have to attend to as a people. And if we don't attend to it, it just goes on forever. And of course, the weaponry gets worse and worse. So I think every time you hear somebody wanting to suppress something or ban something or remove something, we should say no. Now, I do believe there are age-appropriate books for first through third graders, and some of the ones I've been seeing are not age-appropriate. But I trust librarians. They're professionals. I'd rather trust a librarian than a state legislator. Wouldn't you? They're trained. Any other thoughts or questions?
For those of us who choose to stay here or are stuck here, I appreciate your call to action because it's manageable. I wouldn't call it small. I think it's things we can do. I'm curious if your suggestion is the same if we take Jefferson's letter to his grandson literally, where he says his error does me no injury. What if our concern is that it's doing others injury?
Yes. I mean, that's a flippant thing for Jefferson to have said. His error does me no injury. Like, I'm enlightened, they're not, but, doesn't gore my ox. I think you're right that there are ideas now floating around that are damaging to other people. And we have to check them. And so finding a gracious way to check them is really difficult. It's really a challenge. I'll just give you an example. My father was one of my heroes. He's been dead for 30 years. He was a banker in Dickinson, but a mighty intellectual. And when he would hear a racist or sexist joke at a dinner party, he wouldn't say, "How dare you?" or "I must protest," or he'd just quietly get up and leave. Just to make an excuse, I need to go. Because he wouldn't sit for that. So that's a very low level protest, and they might not even have gotten it. Or you could say, I'm sorry, I'm really uncomfortable with that kind of talk. But you have to find a way to respond without taking the bait and increasing the temperature. Why? And here's what I want to say. Why do we have to do this? We're the nice ones. Why do we have to bend over backwards to be gracious when the people that we're talking with are not? They're shouting epithets. But we have to, because if we don't do it, it doesn't get done. And isn't that, I mean, truly, isn't that the teaching of Jesus? Isn't that the central principle of Jesus? That we have to turn the other cheek, and that we have to build the world of peace by tolerance and respect, forbearance. And so I agree with you that we're in a really critical time, and I think no one who cares about this country should be silent now. But the question is, where does your voice count? Where does your voice make a difference? How can you, if someone tells a racist, let's say an anti-Semitic joke at Thanksgiving, what will you do? You know, the question then is, what's the right answer to that without exploding Thanksgiving? And it might not be that, but boy, if my daughter were coming home this Thanksgiving, we would be talking about Gaza a lot, to the point of being tedious, at Thanksgiving at least. And if my mother were alive, they'd get into it. It'd be fun, actually, for me, but because it wouldn't go too far. But a lot of Thanksgiving dinners are going to be ruined this year by young people just back from their freshman year in college. When my daughter went to Columbia, she had a great education. Her first roommate was a Zionist, and she became a Zionist. And I said, oh, honey, give it time. So then she took a course from one of the greatest Palestinian scholars in the world, and she became a Palestinian advocate. I said, honey, give it time, you know. But she wound up, she's more on the Palestinian side than on the Israeli side at this point. But my view is there is no answer to this. There is no answer to this except putting UN troops between the combatants. So I wish we could go on. I'll stay for some fellowship if you want. I just want to repeat what I said at the beginning. I really appreciate you. I really, really appreciate who you are and what you stand for. In Jefferson's world, you'd have 400 cars in the parking lot, or people would walk or take their bikes, I suppose, you know. Secondly, I hope you will take my challenge seriously, artificial good humor, until January 1st. And then I hope you'll report at least to yourself and your loved ones, that didn't work, or that really worked. I'm impressed. This is the best I've got, and I wish I had more. But again, it's John 8:7, Matthew 7:5, Matthew 7:1, and Matthew 7:12, and Luke 6:31. Amazingly, after more than 2,000 years, the answer is right there in front of us. So thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving.
We will extinguish our chalice with these words from Jim Wickman. Our time together ends. In the days before we come together again, may our actions match our words. May our thoughts be filled with love, and may we truly make a difference in a troubled world.